Ah, Lightyear. A gigantic failure for Pixar. While Lightyear did at least break even, it was still a major box office disappointment, and it's considered to be among Pixar's very few truly terrible films. Even though I might enjoy some parts of the movie, for example, the subtle pick-meaniness of it all, it's not really a particularly good movie. And the plot twist in the middle with Buzz meeting himself?
You look good, Buzz. I don't understand.
Yeah, audiences didn't respond well to that at all. It broke established Toy Story lore, and also was just kinda lame, you know? We've already had Inception. Time dilation's not that crazy. Actually, the whole project was kind of a slap in the face to Toy Story fans when you think about it. Right from the opening slideshow. Not only does its existence wipe away pre-existing media which told the story of the Buzz that the toy is based on, but it also directly contradicts the Toy Story movies themselves. The Buzz Lightyear of Star Command TV series didn't deserve to be wiped away for this, you know? And if you've never heard of that series, it's worth a quick Google, but it's not on Disney Plus for some reason. Probably to prevent it from conflicting with the performance of Lightyear. Or Disney just hates themselves, I don't know. The failures of Lightyear go way further than just wiping away the I am your father Star Wars spoof line with Zurg in Toy Story 2. No, Pixar got away with retconning the whole "you've been jealous of my good looks since the 4th grade, pal" bit in Monsters Inc. to just being a monster expression in university, you know? No, it's much deeper than just one line of dialogue. The entire concept of Lightyear is flawed. Lightyear is, from the very first line, expressly supposed to be the exact movie that Andy saw in the 1990s. It's supposed to be the exact same movie that inspired Andy to get him a Buzz Lightyear in 1995. And I mean, in the real world, Toy Story came out that year. You know how that movie looks. And if Andy got Buzz in 1995 and Lightyear was supposedly his movie, that means that this movie had to, in universe, be made at the very latest in 1995, if not earlier. And there is no way that a movie looking as modern as Lightyear could have released then. It's just anachronistic. The technology wasn't there, and there's no visual aesthetic filter to even insinuate that this is a movie from the 90s. Lightyear, of course, has many other flaws too. Replacing Tim Allen for Chris Evans certainly was a controversial choice. And going for a super sleek modern aesthetic instead of something that resembled the art style of pre-existing Buzz media never really won in any favors either. But at the end of the day, I don't think that the movie was necessarily a bad idea. It was just horrendously executed. Picture this. Lightyear's first trailer comes out, but the movie is completely different from the one we've gotten, of course. The film looks like a love letter to the Star Command TV show. Maybe it even reuses some of the characters from that film. Even if they're not the core main cast and just in the background, fans would be happy to have them there. Aesthetically, the film looks like a love letter to that series, starring bulky Space Ranger characters. It could even borrow elements from the Buzz Lightyear video game in Toy Story for its aesthetic, and any other Buzz Lightyear medium. Because honestly, there's too much lime green on white in this Lightyear movie. It's a crime against the color palette, honestly. But on top of all of that though, Lightyear could do a bit of what Inside Out 2 did for Lance Slashblade. Basically being a JRPG protagonist, but set in a fighting game, so they made him look like a JRPG protagonist. He has the blocky proportions of a character from an early 3D game, and when directly contrasted with the modern Pixar characters in the film, he looks off, sure, but it's done in an amazing way. In the case of Lightyear, the movie shouldn't have run from the idea that it's supposed to be made in the 1990s, instead it should have embraced the aesthetic. Though it maybe could have still dressed it up with modern lighting and polish, get some ray tracing in there I guess if that's relevant, but the characters' designs themselves should have looked like they would somewhat work in the first Toy Story, even if it's only when it's on the TV screen segment, you know? They don't have to look plastic per se, but anything to at least lean to the idea that this movie has an artistic style to it. By selling the audience on this specific look, you could more easily sell the audience on the story. And it's not like going for a non-modern look is gonna be the absolute devil child of a thing to do. It's becoming a more and more common thing for people to retroactively create older technology for the sake of nostalgia. More and more indie games are coming out that look like PS1 and PS2 games because that's an aesthetic that scratches an itch. And to see that done in cinema is equally as satisfying as well. When done well. There's attempts of that as well going on in cinema and it doesn't look great, but, you know, leaning into that with animation and care and budget really could have been something special. And on top of that, I feel like Lightyear should have focused more on what the audience already knows and is familiar with. The climax of the film, or at least a major action scene, could have very well been beat for beat the Buzz Lightyear video game from Toy Story 2, for example, just with new context and all retooled. I mean, that would have been an amazing callback to Toy Story 2, but we never see them going for something like that, since Pixar already flubbed it with Lightyear. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't learn their lesson and make another spin-off prequel. And perhaps it could even be easier to do this time. You know, hopefully without falling into the exact same pitfalls once again. And so I present to you now the remake of Woody's Roundup. Imagine this, a second movie in the Lightyear style that tells the origins of Woody. But this time, it learns all of the lessons from Lightyear's failings and creates something that doesn't feel bland. Well, the only way I can actually see this idea being possible is as a TV show, given just how bad Lightyear failed. I'd still like to imagine this as a feature film. It's speculative anyway. Though theoretically, if we were doing this as a show, we could structure it in a way similar to the Woody's Roundup show from Toy Story 2. With the show cancelled right before the big finale. Maybe Pixar could even create a lost episode to finish that story. That's an idea. Now, a Woody's Roundup show needs to be campy, you know? Lightyear took itself far too seriously, and while I think a serious version of the Woody's Roundup story is possible, leaning into the way it appears in Toy Story 2 would definitely be the way to go. Hey there you can make it into the halfway mark of this video. Come along and subscribe if you want to see more essays. You know how it works off to the second half of the video. Bye-bye! That being said, I don't think lifting the style of the Woody's Roundup show one for one from Toy Story 2 is necessarily the greatest idea ever. While it could be stylistically cool, I feel like it would get old very, very fast, especially if it is actually a full-length cinematic experience, rather than just, you know, a Disney Plus streaming original TV show. If I were writing the Woody's Roundup film, I think it should start out by playing the Woody's Roundup theme from Toy Story 2, you know, a nice bit of direct nostalgia. The intro itself should be done with marionettes, and it should look roughly like the show we see in that movie, time accurate and all. And then, as the intro concludes, we could start to see the beginning of an episode done with the marionettes, but then we see the marionettes warp into black and white, with Woody overlooking a train and a town below, with a scene a la the Toy Story 3 opening. Maybe from there, we slowly let color come into the scene, but the palette has a very sepia feeling to it. We transition into a full color palette of the movie as we are taken into the full Western world of Woody. I think this is a much cleaner way to do an opening compared to Pixar's cheesy info card that they do before Lightyear, you know? I mean, really, that's gotta be the worst way to handle that if you tried. This approach would let us use a modern animation style for the majority of the film, but also establish that this is the intention of the original art style. We could even cut back to the puppets for pivotal moments or jokes if we wanted to. It could just be a good bit. Or if Pixar really didn't want to reference the fact that they're making a 1950s-esque cartoon puppet show, it could be a legitimate remake with the high-quality visuals of the start of Toy Story 3, with some aesthetic choices in there to make it, you know, at least slightly nostalgic, and then say, oh, they've rebooted the Woody's Roundup franchise in-universe, here's how it looks. Yeah, you know, whatever. As the movie plays out, whether it's an origin story or just an episode, or the conclusion to the Woody's Roundup story, it's important to keep everything consistent with what we know about the characters from Toy Story 2. Not the toys themselves, mind you, but the characters they were fashioned after from the show. Woody is a true hero, Stinky Pete a bit of an incompetent goofball. Though they would retain many of the same character traits as the toys themselves, for example, Jessie being spunky and fiery-spirited and Bullseye still being Woody's loyal steed, these characters are without a lot of their traumas, you know? They live in the Western fantasy world, rather than the real world the toys in the mainline films inhabit. Jessie, for example, is without her trauma for being abandoned, and Pete is probably not so super manipulative. Would certainly be weird, I guess, to run with a villain character and then make him like a fan favorite, funny, goofy guy. Well, you can make some great fourth-wall-y jokes about that all, you know? Whatever the narrative happens to be, it should be loaded with the American Wild West tropes, but still be compelling to a modern audience. The Mandalorian, for example, is a good example of how to really do this right, because that's a space western, you know? This could very well be a toy western. Either way, the focus should be on creating compelling, emotional arcs between the characters, leaning into that emotional Pixar core. And on top of that, there should be a core world-building assumption to this film as well. As after all, a Pixar film like this works best if you stay true to our world, but change something fundamental. That's kind of what works best in Pixar stuff. While this film isn't operating on the normal what if toys had feeding premise that the Toy Story of course runs off of, maybe it could be some sort of premise that sets it apart from a typical Western. Looking for examples, I think that the indie animated show MechWest does this pretty well, with its robotic helpers transforming its otherwise generic Western setting. They are a core part of the show's world building, and while that premise would be inappropriate here, something of that magnitude or style could really work wonders. Just some sort of fantasy element to really distinguish why viewers should care about the Woody's Roundup world specifically. Maybe something to do with prospecting, or perhaps we could lean into the cheesiness of the original show with mining tools or minerals being alive and sentient, much like the animals. Or we could do something more grounded and go for an environmentalist message. Maybe the core change from our own world could have something to do with the Grand Canyon, since Woody's jump over it is a dramatic part of that original premise. Or heck, maybe it really does just go full-blown, it's gonna be a parody on remakes itself, and it's about a Woody Western show that then has a force-fed-in Lightyear-style sci-fi character, and they try to handle it in-universe while the toys themselves are going through that existential crisis. Wow, a parody of remakes and sequels from Pixar? Now that would be something special by a Disney department. No matter how you went around this show, the goal has to be both recapturing the magic of the original Toy Story 1 and 2, and telling a compelling new story. Because really, Lightyear failed in its ability to do both of those things. Honestly, a Cars Doc Hudson origin story prequel could have easily as well been a more compelling story than Lightyear was. At least it wouldn't mess too much with the canon of the Cars universe, you know? That being said, while I think an idea like this could be interesting, I feel like films like these don't really do much for Pixar. The studio is at its best when they're telling stories they really feel compelled to tell, after all, rather than just trying to force a half-hearted project with one of their IPs onto their audience. If nothing else, I'd say that this is ultimately what made Lightyear fail. The passion just didn't seem to be there. That movie was very much just a generic sci-fi movie with Lightyear in it. For a Woody's Roundup movie to really work, it would need to be helmed by someone who truly believed that they could be doing something great with the premise. And of course, they would have to certainly make sure they've learned from each of Lightyear's many mistakes. But if there's a semblance of a pitch for a Woody remake show, somewhere in this essay is the version I would come up with. For now though, I'd best end it off there. My name's been Daz, thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell me your thoughts on what you would do if Woody had to exist as a movie, and I shall see you all in a little bit. Bye bye.